Hi there once again, and welcome to the third and final part in this series on creating a mechanical arm. As of the last part, we'd got our arm and our claw working together. They were both completely rigged, and we could move our arm along our spline. It all works perfectly well. We could use our pose morph to change the shape of our spline itself, and of course we'd got the claw set up with a rig that would allow it to move in two different ways. We'd given it two different types of motion, and it was all working perfectly well. So what's next? Well, to finish things off, what we're going to do is add a couple more assets. So we'll put a sphere in the scene, and we'll also add a container that the sphere can be dropped into, and then we'll work out how we're going to actually use the claw to pick the sphere up and carry it over to the receptacle and drop it into it. That's what we're about in this tutorial. So without further ado, let's see if we can make this happen. The first thing I'm going to do is bring in a floor object. We'll just put one of those in. And then I'm also going to bring in a sphere. I'll make it 20 in the radius. And I'm going to group it into the wrist and zero it out. So I'll just choose the right mode and we'll zero it out. So that's in the wrist. And then if we select our align to spline and just bring this to 100%. Now the sphere is technically in the correct place apart from its Y height. So we need to, well, I'm also going to zero it out in its rotation coordinates as well. Let's just zero that out. And we can move it out of the sphere, out of the wrist now. And then our coordinates are still slightly wrong, so let's just take those and zero them out correctly. And now we can zero out our Y coordinate for now. Zero out, and we'll leave our Z the way it is because that's where it needs to be. Now our Y coordinate, we've got a radius of 20, so if we move this up 20, it's now in the correct place because it's sitting on the floor. So that is absolutely fine. If we just go into our side view and have a quick look. Yeah, this is ground zero, so it's sitting on the floor. So that's perfectly good. Right, so moving on from here, we'll get a tank, or rather, we'll start with a cylinder, but we're going to make it into a tank, which we can use as a receptacle to drop the sphere into. We'll leave the radius at 50, that's fine. The height we'll make 70. Raise it up in the Y by 35, and now it's sitting on the floor. Move it to somewhere over here. What we'll do, if I get a hold of my pose morph, just take this one down and bring that one up to its 100% position. Let's just do that. That's it. Right, that's great because our claw is at the end of our spline anyway, so that's fine. And we can just move this into position somewhere. Let's go into our top view. So F2 for our top view. That'll be fine. Just off center is fine. So yeah, that's going to work. And then with our cylinder, we can make it editable. Just hit O for object so that we can see what we're doing. And we've got, let's have a look. If I can go into, I'll tell you what, let's just undo that and give it 2 segments in our cap segments and then make it editable again. That's okay. And then I'll go into edge mode, UL for loop select, select this loop. And then by eye, I'm just going to bring it out to somewhere around there. Go into polygon mode, UL once again, select all these polygons and not delete them. I'm going to hit D for extrude and go minus 60, so minus 69, that'll be fine. So that's created a tank, and then what I'll do here, drag this down to the bottom, drop it in, hold down my Alt key and drop it into a subdivision surface for a start, and then I'll also, I don't want a bend deformer, what I want is to hold down my Alt key and put a bevel deformer inside. I actually want it inside my cylinder, and that's given me what I want. That's given me the result that I want. So in my bevel, I'm just going to say the subdivision will be 3, and that's fine. That's looking really nice. So that's created our tank, which we're going to drop the sphere into. Great, so we've got both the final assets in there, and we're pretty much ready to go with our animation now. Before I continue, there's one thing I do need to do, which I've just realised. In this array here, I'd added several more copies, and just to show you how to add more fingers, but I can take that back to 2 now because we don't need those. That's brought that back to where it needs to be. Great. So moving on from here then, I will rename the subdivision surface tank, and I'll also give it, if I come down to my simulation tags, a collider body, because it's going to need to be a dynamic collider. The sphere I can also give a dynamics rigid body tag, and we can leave that as it is. We don't need to change anything in there. We can just leave it exactly as it is. I'm not going to change anything. Moving on from here, we need to start thinking about Xpresso. So I'll bring in an Xpresso tag. I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll create a null for it, drop it in here and call it Xpresso 2, and we'll bring the tag in on that. So that's given us our Xpresso tag, and now we're ready to start thinking about how we're going to animate the moving of the sphere into the tank. The first thing I need to do, I'm just going to shut down the Xpresso window. What I need to do is bring in another null object, and I'm going to group this into the sphere, and I'm going to rename it sphere target. Let's zero it out. So go back into model mode and we can completely zero this out. So now it's in the center of our sphere. Moving on from here, I'll select my pose morph and I will bring this back to 0 and then bring my pose morph back to its first main position. And then what I can do is take the sphere target and group it into the wrist, and now it's in the perfect position, because when we move our claw, the target is absolutely where it needs to be. And what we're going to be doing is giving this target's position to the sphere at the appropriate time, so that it can be lifted by lifted by the claw, or rather the mechanical arm, and then brought over to the receptacle. And then as soon as the claw opens, at that point we're going to switch on the sphere's dynamics and it will become a dynamic object and drop into the tank. That's how this is going to work. Okay, so let's just initialize everything. We're already in our align to spline here, so we'll set this to 20%. Grab a hold of our pose morph and set our pose 0 back to 0%. And then we can work with the claw. Now I found that a good starting point for this was to give the lift a value of 8 and the clench a value of 0.2. And I thought that was quite aesthetically pleasing on the eye. So that's my initial position for this. So we can record both of these, and we can also record our position. We can go into our pose morph and we can say record sliders. So that's given us our initial positions for everything, and we're recorded and ready to go. Before we start working with our Xpresso, I'm going to set up my initial, or my first key pose, which is of course where we get the claw picking up, or at the position where it's going to pick up the sphere. Now at the moment the sphere is dynamic, and we're going to leave it dynamic, but we'll just disable this so that it doesn't drop when I start moving the timeline. or scrubbing through the timeline, I should say. So we're ready to go. Let's grab a hold of our timeline and bring it over to 30 frames. So over 1 second, I'm going to bring my pose morph into its first main pose. Hit record sliders, and then if we take this back, we are ready to go. We have to do it has to be a double hit there to get that back to the beginning. Let's just move this through and see what happens. So that's doing its job. We can see that that's working. So what I'll do around frame 25, I'm going to start moving this pose. So let's just select this and we'll record its position at frame 25, and then to around frame 40 we'll move it into its second position so that it's going to end up there around frame 40. Let's just see if that works. So we record that, see what happens here, see if it's any good. A little bit too fast, if anything, isn't it? It's a little bit too fast. So let's just do it over, say, frame 50. Just move that second keyframe to frame 50 and see what we get there. Not too bad. Let's just do that again. Yeah, that's not too bad, actually. What we could, in fact, do, I think, is make it slightly earlier. Let's just bring this back and make it move slightly earlier. Take that back to frame 45. Yeah, and that's, yeah, I think I'd go with that, I think. Let's just see that again. Yeah, it's already starting to move. Yeah, I'd go with that. I think that's okay. Right, so we've got that moving. I mean, we can always do further tweaks a bit later in the dope sheet, but that's fine. We'll leave that as it is and we'll say that we're satisfied with that. Now, obviously, the claw is going to have to change its status before it reaches the sphere. So that's going to need to open. So let's just see where it needs to start opening. What we can do, I think, is go to about frame, let's go to frame 5. Go into our claw, and again we'll set these with keyframes again so that they're ready to go and they won't change between the first 5 frames. And then we can start thinking about moving this and opening. So let's see what we're going to do. We need to, where do we need to do it? It needs to be probably fully open around here, doesn't it? Right. Initially then it's going to need to be quite wide open. So let's have a go and see what we can do. If we just bring that probably to about 1. If we, yeah, that's not too bad. And then if we just bring, yeah, that down to there. In fact, it can go, I think it can go right wide open. Let's just bring it really wide open, and somewhere around like that is quite pleasing, I think. Yeah, that'll be great. I think that'll look quite nice. So if we record our lift and our clench at that point, let's just rewind back to the beginning and see what we get. So yeah, it starts to open. That's quite good. I'm quite liking that. That looks pretty good to me. Let's do it again. Yeah, that's quite nice. Yeah, it's quite pleasing on the eye. That could go perhaps a little later. Let's just take it to about 15 frames in. Let's see what happens here. Yeah, just that little bit of a pause, and there's a little bit of anticipation there. I like that. That's good. Yes, yeah, I'm liking that. Okay, I think we'll go with that. So the next thing we need to worry about, once we've got to our destination here, the next thing we need is a little bit of a pause, and then we can close the fingers around the sphere. So that's where we need to go next. So once again then, I'll go into my claw and I will record the lift and the clinch the clench, I should say the clinch, the clench at those points. Move forward to 50 on the timeline and do the same again. So that's given me a pause of 5 frames, and then over the next, I'm going to go 15 frames, I'll go to 65. I'm going to set it up at its final destination where it's gripping the sphere, and that needs to be set like this. We've got to set it to 1.9 in the lift, and 0.72 is what I found to be very, very good in the clench. And now it's actually gripping the sphere. So we can record those two there. And let's see what happens now when we play the timeline. Yeah, that's great. That's working fine. I don't think we need to do any adjustment there. It comes down, little bit of a pause, grip, fine. I think that's great. I'm perfectly happy with that. Okay, the next thing from here is to work with Xpresso, because the way this is set up now is something that we can use to actually trigger the expression. So we'll go into the Xpresso editor and we'll do some work on that. I'll just move this over here, make it a little bigger. The first thing I'm going to drag in is actually going to be my claw. And in my user data, I can say lift. I'll bring in a compare node, plumb the output of the lift there, or the claw's lift output port. I'll plumb into the input 1 of the compare. What I'm going to say in here is less than or equal to, and I'm going to place 1.91 in there. Now, if I get a result node, let's just have a quick look and I'll show you why I'm doing this. If I plumb that into there, I get a 1. However, if I get a second result node and I plumb that in here, I've got 1.9 in there. Now, if I simply said is equal to 1.9, I get a 0. So I can't say is equal to 1.9. It's not accurate enough. It has to be less than or equal to 1.91 in order to get a 1 at the output. So don't be tempted to just use the equal to 1.9. It just won't work for you. Okay, great. So that's explained that one. Moving on from here, we'll bring in a condition node. I'll just view that at 100%. Let's get a condition node. We're going to need 4 condition nodes ultimately, but we'll bring the first one in. And this is going to be used to switch the condition node. Now, at the moment, the data type is set to real. It needs to be vector. You'll see why in a minute. Now, I'm going to bring in my sphere. And I'm going to set it up with position and rotation ports at its output stage. So that's ready for us to go there. Now our first condition is going to be dealing with the position, and I also need to bring in my sphere target. And we need to set this up with global position and rotation ports at the output. So our global position can be plumbed into the second input of the condition. So what we're going to be saying here is once our lift our lift parameter of our claw is at less than or equal to 1.91. So in other words, when the claw is gripping the sphere, we need to switch this condition so that our sphere target's global position is going to be passed through this output. And you can probably guess that I'm going to be passing it to the sphere ultimately, and that's exactly what I'm going to be doing. Okay, so that's great. Moving on from here, I'm going to hold my command key and drag another condition. It's already set up and it's ready to go. And the first thing I'm going to do is plumb the output of this condition into the second input of my second condition node here. So how is this going to work? Well, I'll bring in a time node. As per usual, I will add a frame port and I will remove the time port. So yet again, I'm going to be working with frames. Just move down a little bit. And I'm going to bring in two more compare nodes. The second of which I'm going to plumb the output of my frame into input 1. And I'm going to leave this one as equal to in the function and 0 in the input 2. And then plumb this into the switch. The next thing to do is bring in a constant node. And my constant node, I'm going to set its data type again to vector. So we're working with vectors in all of this. And then from here, I'm going to look at my sphere. So if I select the sphere, what I need are these three values. So the X, Y, and Z's need to be placed into our constant node. So we'll select the constant. So the X is 0, we can leave that. 20 in the Y, and minus 111.908 in the Z. And then this can be plumbed into the input 2 of the condition. So you can see what's going to happen here. So when we're at the start of the animation, we're going to switch to this, and then this initial start position of the sphere can be passed to the sphere. That's what we're going to be doing here. So we've brought the sphere in, we'll add a position port, and we can connect this. So that's the first part of this done. Now the sphere, we're also going to be passing the rotation as well as the position. So I want the rotation of the sphere target, so this null here, I'm going to be passing that rotation value as it's moved through its various positions to the sphere as well. Now the reason I'm going to do this is because you might put a texture on this sphere that isn't regular. It's okay if you just put a solid texture, if you just put a solid color on there. So I don't know, you had a red sphere or something that's just red all over, well then you don't really need the rotation. But if it had a marbling effect or something that was completely irregular on it, well then you're going to see that it isn't actually rotating at all. You know, the game is going to be given away. So we don't want that. So we're going to pass the rotation as well. So we'll add the sphere, or add the rotation port I should say, to the input stage of the sphere. That's ready for us. And then we can worry about doing this. Now for a start, we can get a condition node here and another one here. This condition node again can be driven by or switched by the output of the compare. So when we're at our 0 port, or our 0 point I should say, on the timeline, then we're going to be using this condition to switch between another constant, and it's going to be another constant down here, and we're going to need the spheres, or rather we need the sphere's initial values, which of course are going to be 0, 0, 0. So we're going to need to zero that out. So we can plumb that into there, and that will initialize our sphere's rotation for us at 0, 0, 0. And then in this condition here, we're going to need to switch this once again via our lift. So we're either going to be using our sphere's rotation, or we're going to be using the global rotation of the sphere target, and then that can be plumbed into here. It's exactly the same as what we've done up here. It's just replicated, and then the output can be plumbed into the rotation of our sphere. We can also plumb our frame into this compare here, but I'm not going to work with this one yet. This one is actually going to be used to trigger the dynamics of our sphere. So we're going to come down to dynamics here and select enabled. That's the port that we're going to be working with, and we're going to be working with that at a certain point in the animation when we've got everything else set up. So I'm not going to plumb that in yet, and I'll work that out a little bit later. But that for now completes the Espresso expression. That's what we need to do. So when we're at our initial, or our frame 0 on our timeline, our compare here is going to switch both of these, and we're going to be using the start position vectors and rotation vectors for our sphere, and we're going to pass them to our sphere. Once our clench or our claw has gripped the sphere, at that point we're going to switch between these two conditions here. So we're either going to be giving our sphere its initial position, or we're going to be giving our sphere and of course its initial rotation, or we're going to be giving it the rotation or the global position and global rotation of our sphere target when our claw has actually gripped the sphere. And that will work fine. And of course, when the animation is running, this compare is going to switch anyway, because we won't be getting a 1 at this output once the frame value is above 0. So it'll be back to a 0, and it will allow this to pass through. So that's fine. It's all going to work perfectly well for us. Actually, one thing I do need to do is select this constant and 0 it out. I just realised I hadn't done that. We don't want those values in there. That's fine. So that gives us a value of 0, 0, 0 for our sphere's rotation at our initial point. So that's fine. Good stuff. Okay, let's move on from here. Right, so let's just close down the Espresso editor, and then we can move on with the animation. Now, if we select the align to spline and start moving the slider, you can see that the sphere is working. The Espresso is doing exactly what I said it would do. The sphere is moving with the claw, and it's also rotating correctly. So that's great. That's all good. So let's just set that back to 100% and just return the timeline to the beginning. Our sphere is now left in its initial position because we're back to 0. And let's just see what we get when we play the timeline now. See where we are. So we're going down to there, we pause, we grip. Okay, so let's see the timeline for that. So it's around 65 frames where we come to the end of that. Let's just select the claw and make doubly sure. Yes, it is 65 frames. Right, so we're going to want another brief pause to add some anticipation. So if we go to frame 70, what we'll do is, where are we? If we select our align to spline, we can put a keyframe there, and then we can move to 70 just to give us a little bit of anticipation. We may adapt that a little bit further later, but that's okay. We'll say that for now. Record again, and then we'll move to say frame, or going to frame, how are we going to do this? We do 85. I tell you what, let's go a little bit further. We'll go to frame 90 for now, and we'll move this so that it gets back to around here, and record there. Right, let's just see what that looks like. Yes, yeah, okay, that looks good. So we get that tiny little bit of anticipation before it moves, and then back it goes. And I think that looks pretty good. So from here, the next thing to do is start working with our pose morph again. So let's just go back to before frame 90. We'll go back to around frame, I think frame 80, and we'll start moving our pose morph. So we'll get a hold of this. Again, we'll record sliders. And then we'll move to frame 90, frame 100. I think we'll go to frame 100. And we'll bring this pose back down to 0. And at the same time, we'll think about moving the other pose. What we'll do, in actual fact, let me think. Bring that back to there. If I go a little bit earlier than this, if I go, say, frame 90, bring that back to 0, record sliders, then go to frame 100 and bring that to its 100% pose and record sliders. Let's see what happens there if I do that. Let's just go back to the initial frame, just run that, rip, up we go, over. Yeah, not bad, not bad. Again, I'll probably do some work in the dope sheet maybe with this, but I'll leave that as it is for now. I think that's okay. And then what I can do is around frame 95, I'll start moving the align to spline again. So I'm going to record there, move this till it's over there, and then so that's at frame 95. We'll do this at frame 110. I think we'll go to 110 and move this over into its final position and record that. Let's see what we get. Yeah, I'm liking it. I think that's great. I think that works. Let's just see that again. I think that does work. Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit staccato in the middle, but as I say, I can get into the dope sheet and work on that, and I will do that afterwards just as a tweak. But anyway, for now, I think I'm going to go with that. I think that looks really quite good. Right, so let's just drag the timeline back to where we end up there. Okay, so it's 110. Great, so at this point, again, we're going to need a little bit of anticipation, and then we need to open the claw. So let's see where we are. So our claw is selected. Right, keyframe, record both of those. Move to 115. Record again. And then we'll do these over 15 frames, I think. So let's just go. So where are we? 115, yeah, 130. Yeah, I think 130. That probably will work. Okay, let's see where we are. Let's just do that anyway. So let's open this up. So we'll put this to, I think we'll go to 1 for that to open it. And bring this somewhere around 4. That should be okay for that. I think that will work. So let's just keyframe both of those and let's see what that looks like when we run the timeline. Yeah, that's going to work fine. So let's just go back to where we think we're going to need to get the sphere moving with its dynamics, somewhere around, yeah, I mean about 123. Around 123. So let's open the Espresso. And in this compare, we can say greater than or equal to 123. And then connect it to our dynamics. Bring the timeline back to the beginning. Let's see what happens when we do this. Yeah, works perfectly. Absolutely spot on. So that's great. So we've got our dynamics plumbed into the Espresso expression. We've compared to greater than or equal to 123 frames. And at that point, we've enabled the dynamics for the sphere and it's all working perfectly well. That's great. So the only thing that remains to do now is to take the arm back to its initial position. Perfectly simple to do. So I'll bring my timeline back to 130 and then we'll keyframe our position for our align to spline once more. So I'll keyframe that one. Again, we'll have a little bit of anticipation. I think we'll go 10 frames this time for the anticipation, just to give it a little bit more. Keyframe that again, and then over, let's see, 150, let's go 165, just to go to 165. So over 25 frames, we'll move this back to 20%. Let's just record that. I mean, obviously we're going to move the spline as well, but we'll record the position of that. And let's just run that over the timeline. Let's just see what happens. Yeah, like it. That's pretty good. It could be a bit faster though. Let's move it back to say 160 and just see if that's any good. It might be still too slow, but we'll see. Yeah, I mean, let's make it a little bit faster than that. I think we can go 155. That's half a second. That should be okay. Let's see what we get. I mean, this doesn't run in absolute real time, but it doesn't matter. Yeah, I'd go with that, I think. I think we'll go with that for now. That's okay. Right, so we've started moving that at 140 frames. Let's go 5 frames and we'll record sliders for our pose morph there. And at this point, we're going to go to, where are we? We went to 155 frames, didn't we, with that? So if we go to 155, or maybe 160, I'll tell you what, let's go to 160. Bring this back to 0 and record sliders. And let's see what we get there. See if that looks okay. Well, it's not bad, not half bad. It's a good starting point for it anyway. Right, so what we want to do, let's just run that through, because we've got to deal with the claw as well and reset that to its initial position. Yeah, because at the moment it's not in its initial position. What we can actually do though, I think with that pose morph there, what I will do is just move this back. I think I'll put that at 155 as well, just so that we get the two synchronized. Let's have a look, see what we get. Yeah, I like that more. I think that's better. Okay, great. So what we'll do then, we'll go back to 145. Yeah, about 145 is where we can probably start moving the claw back into its initial position, unless of course we go a little bit higher. Let's have a look, see what we can do. Maybe, yeah, I mean, maybe we can do it close to the end of the animation. I think we can probably start doing that there actually. Let's do this. So let's select the claw, record once again, and if we just go back 155, and then we can set this to its initial position, which was 8 and 0.2. Yeah, that's back at its initial position. Let's record those. And we can always change it again. Let's just see what we're going to get. So we'll run this. Yeah, I mean, that's fine. That's really good, actually. Yeah, I like that. I like that very much. It's good. I like that a lot. Yeah, the one thing I'm not sure of is that staccato bit in the middle is a little bit dodgy. Let's just open the dope sheet. Let's just have a quick look in there, see where we are. Open the pose morph up and just double check. So run the timeline. That's the point at where it is. It's just before there. Just get the timeline and run it back. It's that point, isn't it? So whatever's going on there, let's just see if we can make some adjustments in here. Let's just frame everything. Right, that's the point at which we think there's a bit of a problem. So let's, so where are we? So it's where these pose morphs are swapping over. Let's just, yeah, it's a little bit staccato when it hits that point. It's just there. Yeah. So maybe we can just adjust that slightly. If we get a hold of just this one and move it back to there and just see if there's a difference between them. Let's just see what happens when we do that. Yeah, that if anything has made it slightly worse. So let's just bring that forward by a couple of frames there and see if that makes any difference. Yeah, that's smoother like that, but it's not an awful lot different. What we've got a bit of an offset between the two of them. Let's have a look if we can bring pose morph 1. If we bring that slightly back by a couple of frames as well, so there's an offset between the two of them. Let's see if that makes it. Yeah, that's better. I think that's better. We can make it slightly better still if we just bring that one that way and that one another frame that way. Let's see if that smooths it out. Yes, much better. Much better. Yep, I think that's fine. Yes, much better. Great. I'm going to settle for that and say that that's how you go about making a mechanical arm capable of lifting a sphere and dropping it into a tank. And that completes this series, so I really hope you've enjoyed doing this and that it's been worthwhile and a lot of fun. I've enjoyed bringing it to you as always. And if you have enjoyed this video, then please give it a like. And if you haven't subscribed already to the channel, then please do so and ring the bell. And of course, leave a comment. And wherever you happen to be on social media, please share the video because all of this good stuff helps to keep the channel moving in the right direction. But anyway, that just about wraps this one up. So I'll see you very soon on the next tutorial.